In the 60s, the development of the myth of swinging London and the success of British pop music and fashion made British society smart and exciting. After decades in which Britain had followed American trends, suddenly the process seemed to have been reversed. In the end, it all got rather out of hand. But for a while, British cinema was big business. In the mid-60s, all the major American studios had offices here in Soho, the heart of the film industry. In 1964, MGM said they were going to make 9 films in Britain. Paramount topped that by saying they'd make 17. By 1967, 90% of the funding for British movies came from America. It was an open question just what effect this huge influx of cash might have on the native industry. And it's true that sometimes American backers did mean glossier productions.
Medium dry vodka martini, mixed like you said, sir, and not stirred.
In the Cold War, spies became hot property. Some were rather glamorous, others more down to earth.
Yours is a blue Zodiac.
Trainee Agent Daphne Honeybutt, sir.
Number?
382235.
No, your number, not your vital thingamajig.
Costume pictures were back in fashion. Some won Oscars. Others were to end in disaster. The company that really cleaned up here was United Artists. Since the 30s, they'd been the most active of the American companies in Britain. But in the 60s, based here in Film House, they really came into their own. They were canny enough, as we saw earlier in the series, to back the Beatles in A Hard Day's Night. And back in 1961, they backed another hunch which paid off when they decided that a certain English writer might translate well to the screen.
Bud Ornstein, our British production office head, called and said, Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman are coming to New York about a project they want to discuss with you. Can you set up the meeting with yourself and Arthur? And I said, well, what is it? He said, they won't tell me. You know, they say it's very important. And I said, okay, I'll set it up. Cubby and Harry came in. And Cubby said, we have the rights to James Bond. They never left the office.
Have concluded bond deal with United Artists Production. Starting October 15th, stop. Urgent, do screen treatment, breakdown, Thunderball, stop. Dr. No or Thunderball, probably first subject, stop.
We'd agreed to make this picture for Dr. No, the first movie, for $1,100,000 on the basis that all the movie would really be, all the money would be below the line, that it had to look and feel like the books were written, and that we didn't care who starred as James Bond, but whoever it was, let's get a lot of options, because the deal was that every time we made a book, we could buy another book.
There was a nationwide search for an actor to play the secret agent in Dr. No, and Ian Fleming's book got a thorough reworking to make it ready for the new star.
I said this one day to Ian, and it didn't upset him. I said, basically, you know, the plot of Dr. No is pretty monogram, big picture. And he said, dear boy, he said, I wrote it in 4 weeks or something. It's not the Bible.
But it was a gamble, and the producers were backing an unknown Scottish actor.
The whole of this idea was to give a sort of an impact in the first presentation of Sean Connery. You just see pieces of Sean, no more, which made the audience look forward to seeing who is this person. There, you've seen Sean just from the back. The first time we see that.
Suivi.
C'est suivi.
The house will cover the distance.
Bien, madame. Oui, monsieur. Changeur, s'il vous plaît.
I need another 1,000.
I admire your courage, Miss...
And now we're going to see Sean for the first time. She says, who do I make this check out to? Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Mr. Bond, I suppose you wouldn't care to,
There you have him.
I have no objection.
The shirt is made by Lanvin, the suit is Anthony Sinclair.
Andre, I must pass the shoe.
And the handkerchief is the way I wear it, and a little slit of white. He's a winner. This man is not a loser, you know. And he's a winner in every sense. He's going to take this girl home, and he's going to lay her clean as a whistle.
just the things we're getting into.
We made it with enough elements in it and a kind of a tempo, a rhythm to it that was American, that they wouldn't have time to get bored. Because if they had time to get bored, they'd start looking at the script, and they'd look at all the holes in it.
I'd like to send a cable.
Yes, of course. Oh, by the way, the car you ordered, it's been delivered.
I would have never have scored this way. This was not written for the scene. It's the director or the editor just saying, let's lay it in. It's a kind of a glue job way of doing things. But when it worked, it worked. You know, it's a strange thing about music and film. When it sticks, and that's what happened with that piece and this character. It was a marriage.
James Bond, you have a reservation for.
Ah, Mr. Bond, your room is ready. Number 32.
32 for Mr. Bond.
Hope you enjoy your stay.
Thank you.
It was always my intent to copy, and even better, the style of American pictures in the cutting side of it, and to make them move fast. And of course I had an opportunity. We weren't doing anything that was intellectual. We were doing something that was entertainment, completely entertainment.
Get up.
They said, we're going to make $5 million with this picture. And by the end of the dinner, it had gone up to 7 to 8. Finally, they were going to gross $10 million. So I said, if they do that, then we'll obviously make another one. But nobody, it is nonsense to say that we knew what kind of success we were going to have. We never did. We were all rather bemused and amazed at this astonishing success.
The Bond series began to roll, but producer Harry Saltzman wasn't going to put all his spies in one basket. And in 1964, he created a rival for his own 007. He'd come across another British writer and found another young British actor who he thought would give the suave James Bond a run for his money.
The Bond was the spy as a hero. The Ipcress file in the Harry Palmer series was the spy as victim. How he equated me with Harry Palmer, I don't know. But I think what he liked was I wore glasses. He wanted a hero with glasses, he called it.
Canadian Sidney Furie was brought in by Harry Saltzman to direct this anti-Bond spy picture. Not an entirely happy experience for him.
The strangest walking off a film that I've ever seen a director do. He had a row with Harry. We were shooting at Shepherd's Bush, and he burst into tears and jumped on a number 12 bus going towards Marble Arch. And we were following him in a Phantom 6 Rolls Royce. And we followed him all the way down the Bayswater Road with Harry Saltzman leaning out of the window, yelling at the conductor, "Stop the bus, you've got that director on there." Anyway, we got the bus stopped before we got to Marble Arch and coaxed Sidney off and coaxed him back to finish what I still think is his best movie.
Now, I was very depressed, always, before we started shooting, thinking, thinking that this is going to be really lousy, and I didn't know what to do. So I thought, you know what, I will come up with a style of shooting that's different. I put shoulders across the screen. I shot up at things. I shot down, this way, that way, just to make it different, just to give it a style and a character.
It was lifted and Taylor killed.
It was done out of insecurity, is the reason. It was done, well, I know the picture will go down the drain, but they'll remember what I did with it. Well, they never remember what you do with it. You find that out. Either something works or it doesn't work. It's rare that people say, yeah, it was a stinking film, but boy, was it beautifully made. They just don't do that. But at any rate, at that point, that's what I had to do to fight back.
Operator, I'm getting unobtainable on Knightsbridge 2149. Could you check it for me, please?
That line is discontinued, caller.
You you see, Sidney figured that you couldn't quite see everything all the time, and what was going on. So he still shot it through the telephone, even though I'd left the telephone. And then there was always the CIA agent with the broken glasses. All these little touches.
I remember when Sidney Furie directed that fight scene outside the Albert Hall, and he kept the camera. I mean, it was like two ants on a mound fighting. And Saltzman went crazy. He said, "You don't shoot a fight scene like that. You got to get in there." And Sidney said, "No, that's how you do a Bond fight sequence." The music was it wasn't nothing to do with action music at all. It was this slow arpeggios on the cymbalum, and these strange chords, and it created a totally different effect. And we were all, I mean, we would never have done that had we not come off a Bond movie. If I'd have been doing other things and come onto that movie, I'd have probably scored it totally differently.
I tried anything and everything. And somehow it worked. But I think it worked as a Michael Caine.
United Artists might have felt on home ground with adaptations of best-selling spy thrillers, but a very different kind of adventure was waiting for them when they hooked up with a small British independent company, Woodfall Films, led by director Tony Richardson.
I had seen the film that Tony had directed previously, Loneliness of a Long-Distance Runner. And I'd seen the Woodfall film, Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, which he produced, that Carol Rice directed. And I wanted to be in business with this group of people. It was as simple as that.
On the back of those early successes, the Woodfall team had set up their offices in Curzon Street in London's West End.
The first thing one learned was how to mix a good Bloody Mary.
Yes, very essential. And open a bottle of champagne.
And open a bottle of champagne. Although, yes, it was more Bloody Marys in those days. The whole area looked like an 18th century production office because it was all panelled, and it was like the original building.
The funny cupboards full of scripts and piles of film everywhere. And it's so untidy, you can't imagine.
And very dirty.
This funny little staircase, which if you'd had a drink, you could easily fall down.
It was fairly primitive, but nobody seemed to care, and it was not a 9-to-5 situation. But there was a madness, because you never knew who was going to come up those stairs. Suddenly, you know, whether it was Nureyev or John Gielgud or whoever, that's what made the great excitement.
By this time, the leading players at Woodfall were director Tony Richardson, writer John Osborne, and producer Oscar Lewinstein. The three had met at the Royal Court Theatre and continued to move between stage and screen. Their working methods were rather different from the rest of the British film industry.
It's a very joyless business making films in those days, it seemed to me. Dull and unspontaneous, and everything seemed to be done by the book. Whereas, I think in those days with a Woodfall film, you felt you were having a bit of an adventure and perhaps even doing something rather improper.
One of the more improper things that Woodfall wanted to do was to make a film of Henry Fielding's novel, Tom Jones. This 18th century romp had been turned down by the company's British backers, but was eagerly picked up by United Artists.
Tom Jones was the project that was available, and I felt that the combination of talents of John Osborne and Tony Richardson, and the kind of cast they would put together, because he indicated he wanted Albert Finney to play the lead, was the kind of risk, even at what today seems like small change, but then was a risk of $1,100,000, was something that we had to take.
Tony threw a pre-shooting party, which was, we all know about wrap parties at the end of shooting. Tom Jones had a pre-shooting party. It was held at the White Elephant in Curzon Street, and the top brass from United Artists came along. And Tony stood up and said, well, here we are. We're all going down to Dorset to have a lovely holiday. And I looked at these people from United Artists, and they really wondered what they'd let themselves in for.
Tom, thank you. Welcome home, Sophie.
Tom Jones marked Tony Richardson's break with the working-class realism of his previous films. Here was a chance to combine a naturalistic style of shooting with a historical epic. He could work in color, and the title role seemed perfect for his star, Albert Finney.
Don't worry, Sophie, I'll get it back for you.
Tony was a person who wanted to do things differently, not for its own sake, but he had a sort of particular view of cinema. And much of that was often very fluid camera work. We ditched the old heavy studio equipment because it simply was too heavy, too big to lug around into houses and such. And we used a lot of new equipment that was coming in. And much of the work I did for him was handheld.
The decision was that if the costumes, if the art direction and the costumes and the locations, the backgrounds, if all those things were impeccably in period, then we could afford to use an extremely modern camera technique. And that, I think, is really the key to why Tom Jones doesn't look like like a costume picture, because it looks like a newsreel taken at the time, if you like. Even when he'd finished, he was very depressed. He was very depressed. Prior to the film's release, he really thought he had a turkey on his head.
But the turkey turned into a golden goose when Tom Jones won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture. It was the first time since 1948 that a British film had won.
Then the crowd hears Frank Sinatra announce the Best Picture.
Tom Jones, Tony Richardson.
He was in a state of almost hysterical euphoria at the success, and it was amazing. I mean, a British film getting all those Academy Awards, which, admittedly, in those days, hadn't got the hysteria surrounding them that they have since. I mean, I got that old thing over there. At the time, people didn't think much of it outside Hollywood, and even there. I mean, all that happened was I got offered a few more costume pictures.
It made a fortune for the company, which may not have been totally good for us. It meant we could, because we then made an arrangement with United Artists that they would finance our next 6 films. We were able to do more or less what we liked.
But in 1967, Tony Richardson decided to take Woodfall down a very different path. Under the spell of actress Jeanne Moreau, he whisked his production team off to France to make Mademoiselle, based on a script by Jean Genet. So caught up was Richardson with his new star that he went straight on to shoot a second picture with her, The Sailor from Gibraltar. This took the whole team on a cruise round Europe.
But I don't. We had this fucking great boat, and the whole thought was that he would sail from location to location. He managed that pretty well on the Sailor from Gibraltar, didn't he? And so it was magic in the French forest, and then it was magic all around the Mediterranean on this yacht.
And we were with him, you see. We were
Yes.
abroad for virtually 2 years.
And you see, so we became gypsies at the same
Living
time.
in Egypt, Greece,
We started,
France,
yes.
Italy.
Neither of Tony Richardson's French films were a success, but this did nothing to dampen his spirits.
I never forget being told to go down Bond Street and choose something for Tony, or the selection things for him to choose from, for Tony to give Jean Moreau for Christmas. And going in and out of all the big jewelers with my little handbag, saying I've come to find a diamond bracelet or whatever it was. And I walked away with thousands of pounds.
I did the same from Asprey's.
And afterwards, I always wondered, why did they give them to me? Well, they never checked up.
They never checked the same for me.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And I remember telling my father about this, and he said, my God, you're terrifying me. Supposing they'd said, oh, we gave you 2 of those. You know, how would you prove it? And they never had any receipts on it. It was astonishing. And you just said the magic word, you know, film, Woodfall, Tony Richardson,
That's right.
and they got out their trays of diamond brooches.
Tony Richardson's largesse, despite the failure of his European films, was only possible because he was still the man who had made Tom Jones. And people wanted to believe that this glamorous figure could still pull another Oscar out of the bag. And of course, he was part of the excitement about British ideas and talent that was bringing the American executives here in droves.
Initially, we based ourselves at the Savoy Hotel. It seemed to be an appropriate place for an American agency, particularly being the first one over here. And we had a number of clients who stayed there, Judy Garland and various others. So it was convenient and fun, to say the least.
We were all after the same thing. Hit pictures, and it was very, very competitive.
A slogan was raised.
that whatever story you've got is going to shoot better in London. And the most unlikely material was transplanted to London, hoping to somehow benefit from the aura or the cachet that had been created by the success of all these pictures. Remember that in addition to film, there was a music revolution going on at the time, there was a fashion revolution going on at the time. Time magazine was devoting an entire issue to what was called swinging, switched-on London.
Casino Royale was one of the more bizarre productions to touch down in London, unleashing 5 directors, 5 screenwriters, 3 James Bonds, and 200 international beauties on an unsuspecting public.
It was a lunatic affair, the last film made by producer Charles Feldman. He was furious about the success of the Bond films. He had bought Casino Royale ages before, and he just couldn't forgive himself that he hadn't done something with it. So finally he decided what he was going to do was to ruin the Bond business.
No time for window gazing, Moneypenny. Martha's been kidnapped.
But Sir James...
That's an unidentified flying object. Clever of you to notice it. And there's a squadron of our fastest jets trying to track it down. Control?
There's the canteen.
It was a total lunacy. After about 18 months, I really couldn't take any more of it, and I withdrew from that.
Feldman could never make up his mind. There were days when you wanted to hug him, and there were days when you wanted to cut his throat. He would call up at 3 in the morning sometimes, and he was in London too, but he was good. And he said, where are we shooting tomorrow? And I would tell him, and he'd say, oh, yeah, that's the set I don't like. He said, I'm going to have him redo the set. So I said, but all Ursula Andress's clothes have been designed. We'll scrap the clothes. We'll do them to go on another set. Now, he had sets built at MGM in Elstree, Shepperton, Rank, at Pinewood. He had them all over the place. So we just nipped around. He would call me up at some ungodly hour and say, look, he said, I've got George Raft, I've got Bill Holden will do Tuesday. And this is what he was doing, bringing stars in. And all this had to be written in overnight. I would have to write scenes in for them. This is the chaotic thing.
I really climbed the board because I thought it was terribly funny and it might be a bit of a lark. And John Huston was in it. Val Guest was directing, and there was another American director, so I was in good company. I thought, well, if it's good enough for John Huston, it's good enough for me.
I don't think they had any idea, except for a very few of them, what they were doing. It was a question of finding ways to spend the money. And in many cases, the money was squandered. And I think, in a way, it began a process of eroding some real talent base here, where there was a very strong work ethic of people doing things because they may have believed in them. And I think that slowly became eroded with this availability of money to do anything.
We were in a little bit of a cocoon of our own invention, which we enjoyed. After the success of Carry On, Sergeant, one particular producer here said to me, oh, now, Peter, you can name your own price with the distributors. You can make an epic. I said, bugger the epics, I want to stay in my own backyard. And that's what we did. We stayed in our own backyard. When we first came over here, Pinewood was known as a very expensive studio. In fact, a lot of people didn't come here because they thought it was too expensive, a lot of producers. And we were coming in with a budget of £90,000. We were looked down upon as, I think, virtually amateurs.
Really cheap filmmakers.
Amateurs, sort of spivs coming in and trying to knock something off.
But also,
without
Peter, they were a little frightened because they could see their castles demolishing.
The uniquely British humor of the Carry-Ons made them a huge success. During the 60s, 14 were made, each going straight into the top 10. They rolled off the production line at Pinewood Studios, which was also the home of the lavish and sophisticated Bond movies.
They had their world and we had ours. The only time we ever came anywhere near was when we wanted to call Charlie Hawtrey 007.5, and they threatened us hers.
Peter was very firm and very tough on how we operated. And he even locked the stages at lunchtime to prevent people sort of charging lunchtime hours that didn't work. But we had to make very low-budget pictures. If you can find locations within the studio without having to build, it's the thing to do.
Lift up! Head in hand! Speak! Give name, rank, and number!
Private Whittle, J, 36360.
We don't pander to...
we don't pander to...
America or foreign...
Anywhere.
EECs or anybody.
I've never been to America, so I don't know what it's like over there.
I do, but can't get him over there.
Not everyone was able to resist the chance to experiment with bigger budgets and more exotic locations. Basil Dearden and Michael Relf, the men who'd made Victim and Sapphire, now found themselves in a world of international stars and swimming pools.
It was very seductive. I mean, we were paid a lot more money. We were given a lot more money to work with. We were given much bigger stars and so on. It was a great liberating feeling, as a matter of fact.
Superb.
For you, a peace offering.
No, Mr. Richmond, I couldn't possibly take
Wear it. If I don't behave myself, you can give it.
We felt, I think perhaps wrongly, that we ought to make a different type of film. They did one. Films that they felt they could handle internationally, and not indigenous British films. You know, because we were in effect making a Hollywood film, that we should go to town on those sort of production values. We got Ken Adam to be the art director, who'd just done one of the Bond films, and I think he did some magnificent sets. We reckoned that we were filmmakers in the Hollywood mold. And when we had the opportunity of more money and an international distribution, we seized on that and wholeheartedly tried to make the sort of films that we thought that they wanted. And we didn't really ever succeed in doing that.
The bottom had started to fall out. And I think a large part of that had to do with the overproduction of movies in England by the American companies. As I said, they financed just about anything.
The film that I was probably most passionate about was the one that was the greatest financial disaster that we had in that period, and that was Charge of the Light Brigade.
The whole of this building was completely stuffed with research material. I mean, the walls were covered. You remember blow-ups of Roger Fulton's Crimean War photographs. I mean, we lived and breathed, didn't we?
And
everything was here.
It took 2.5 years because, you see, that valley had to be prepared. So they went out on early recce, chose that location. It was very important geographically to get that right location.
And I had a wonderful Turkish young man who was from an upper-class family who was able to get me to see all the top people, including the president. And I took Tom Jones out and played it for him one night. And he had his family spread around and this cigar smoking, and they watched it. I don't know what they thought of it, but he seemed to be impressed. And we were given permission. Then they loaned me 4,000 infantry men. So they play all the roles that you see on the mountain. One day they'll have English uniforms on. The next day, those are all the things we had made in Istanbul, will be Russian or French, you know.
I wrote the screenplay, which I was quite pleased with. And then, of course, you put it into the chicken roost and they all tore it to bits. And it really was a sort of breakdown in my professional relationship with Tony. And we never saw eye to eye. And he wrote me a long letter from Turkey saying, well, I don't think you're really interested in filmmaking at all. And I think perhaps he was right.
Woodfall might have thought they were back on course with the Charge of the Light Brigade. This story of the Crimean War had a proven screen pedigree. Errol Flynn had made a successful cinema version in 1936. And it was the English heroic subject par excellence, celebrated in verse by Alfred Lord Tennyson.
It is one of the greatest
tragedies that ever was inflicted on anybody, the charge of the Light Brigade. And it also encapsulates an England in change, in enormous change.
It is good to see you both, and here of all places. It is good. England is looking well.
The young people, the young officers, Nolan, played by David Hemmings, in revolt against the old system, which was both hopeless from the military point of view and deathly from the mentality of those who were guiding this outmoded approach to military warfare.
I do not propose to recount my life in any detail, what is what. No damn business of anyone, what is what. I am Lord Cardigan, that is what. Them cherry bums, you see 'em tight, my cherry bums, I keep 'em tight.
I wanted it to have the flavour and the colour of the 19th century. So I went to the memoirs of various soldiers, and I read some Carlyle and some Thackeray, and I put together a sort of language that has never existed outside the charge of Light Brigade. I invented a kind of syntax that seemed to me to say this might well have been the way that people spoke.
Young men of London, if you would not be pushed by haughty masters, would not be ruled by anyone except the Queen, God bless her, who have given thee up this day to their wives for finals, you can do no better than to list for the 11th Regiment of Hussars.
Those scenes which are seen for a few marvellous fleeting moments are the other old England, not the England of oppression and of madness and of nationalism, but the England of people who want to get married, who think it's wonderful to have a piano so you can play some lovely songs, who think it's great to dance together on a lawn and improvise your fun with your friends.
To make the film, Richardson assembled a veritable army of British actors, which included Sir John Gielgud, Trevor Howard, Harry Andrews, and David Hemmings. They started shooting in London, with Richardson working closely with cameraman David Watkin, wheeling history back onto the streets of the capital.
That's the Duke of Wellington's statue. It was subscribed for and loved by the whole nation. Now they don't know where to put it.
Are they going to put that statuary? It can't stay there to be enjoyed by me alone.
They're not going to leave it there. They just don't know where to put it.
It's very much in my light for paperwork area. I wish they'd take it away.
You and I, my lord, are always of the custom when in difficulty to ask ourselves how the great Duke would have acted and decided in similar circumstances.
Yeah, I am. I will. He was surely right that when there is danger, it is the persons with a stake in the country, land, position, wealth, that are best able to defend it.
It was an idiotic old Lord Raglan who was an old, and didn't know which side he was basically general of. And I did 1 week in London at the Mint, which we only managed to get for a week, of an interior in an office. So I laid out the part of it and played that one scene, which seemed to be on the right lines. And this funny one-armed old man was very vague, putting coal on the fire with the other arm and so on, and being quite idiotic about everything. So that I felt I'd laid the foundations of the part well before we went to Turkey. But there was all the riding to do, which I was very, very afraid of. One day when I was on my horse, there was a shot lined up right along the top of a hill, and I thought, if my horse bolts now, I can't stop it.
My lord!
An order, my lord? An order off to the cavalry?
Yes, an order off to the cavalry. Place them out of shot. We really should keep our cavalry in a bandbox. Have them take ground somewhere with a good view. They must not be allowed to feel out of things. But I don't want to find them getting shot at, raggedy at the edge.
Well, how do you want it to go, my lord?
Well, of course, Harry, I should want us to win. Form the infantry nicely for the assault while I talk to the French. Yo-ho! And give them a smile, Eddie. You know, they always go off the better for a friendly face.
It was a terrible responsibility, and getting the horses to stop on their marks and all that kind of technical complication, and terrific heat, of course. It was fearfully hot. And the uniforms were very thick and very heavy to wear, and swords and boots and all that.
It fell between two stools. You know, one didn't quite know how seriously to take it, since the film offers you up these buffoons, but at the same time includes in it characters of commitment like Nolan, and also gives you a very, very forceful message.
Do you see the Russian army, my lord? Do you? For a full 50 minutes, Lord Lucan has stood and watched. This is no way, my lord. There sit the finest cavalry in the world. Men who will follow their officers to the ends of life. Men who take it for granted that their officers know best. The mere sight of the brigade moving would be enough.
Good morning, sir.
Tony was trying to make a film about class, about England as it existed then, actually about England as it's always existed and as it exists now. And he was using that period and that event as a metaphor for it. He was showing that the most expendable thing is man. It always has been. It was an anti-Vietnam War film, only in the sense that it was about attitudes to war.
For one very giddy week, I was puffing up like a pouter pigeon because I thought that we had really shown them. When the film opened at the Odeon Leicester Square, it came within a few pounds of the house record there, which was held by a Bond film. And the reviews, in spite of the fact that Tony and the reviewers were sniping at each other, were extremely favorable. And on the basis of that, it's like I felt, well, I certainly showed them. The second week, you could shoot deer in the cinema without endangering anybody's life.
The people watched it in dead silence. Now, there were some laughs, but they watched it in dead silence, and I think they left stunned. I heard people saying marvelously effective in that, but it didn't come down. It didn't make it.
If things were going badly wrong for United Artists on an epic scale in a valley in Turkey, Warner Brothers might have thought they were on fairly safe ground when they backed an inexpensive flat share story set here in Notting Hill Gate. James Fox plays Chaz, an East End gangster on the run, who moves into the home of a reclusive rock star, Turner, played by Mick Jagger.
It's been a mistake. You can't have the room. What? It's not for rent. Wait a minute, the lady just said...
We had a real house, you know, and we just wandered around in there. I mean, I really got into the house. I did get a bit involved in it because, though, the person in the movie, Turner, is very much like me. It's not really like me. It's just one part of me, you know. I don't live like that all the time.
Mick's approach to acting was, once he discovered what it involved, he wasn't interested. Because, I mean, I think now I understand why, because he is a performance, he's performing, so it was stupid to think, you know, that he had to do any work on that. As regards the work on the scene, that didn't interest him either. The mechanics of acting didn't seem to really impinge on him, and once you knew that, that was fine.
Why don't you play us a tune, pal? I don't like music. Comical little geezer. You look funny when you're 50.
Jagger and Fox were well matched by the two first-time directors of performance, writer Donald Cammell and cinematographer Nicholas Roeg.
The most difficult thing, I think, to do with film is let it go. There's so much control, and you have the potential for so much control in film. Probably, if we hadn't been together teasing each other and egging each other and saying, God, that's a bit ordinary, that's a bit, that's ordinary, whatever. But teasing each other. If we'd been alone, I don't think it would have been this, well, certainly wouldn't have been the same movie.
Nick used to come in and watch the rehearsals. He'd come in, you see, blue blazer. He always had to wear a blue blazer. It was one of the rules of the set, that Nick had to wear the blue blazer and the tie, and I had all the gear, you know. I knew what the setup would be verbally. I knew how it was going, where we were going, how it would be blocked. I would then block the actors, and he would block the camera. And it worked great.
I was just having a laugh, you see, with my act, with my image. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Thought you would. He reckons, my agent, that time for a change.
Chaz is a tremendous performer in the arena of violence, and he's an artist. And the rock and roller is violent, artistic, and paradoxically impotent because he's withdrawn behind the shutters. I suppose the drama is, how can he harness his own power again? How can he analyze the nature of power, violence, and manipulation, which are his art? And yet, how can he change this disgusting, horrible villain who needs changing, who needs his whole value system just taking out of him? He has a means of doing that, drugs.
Yeah.
That is, in a sense, what it's about.
I've never seen that sort before.
Funny enough, the people who used to sell drugs that I was aware of used to sell heroin too. And I mean, they used to use heroin. So I mean, in fact, it was widely used, wasn't it, at that time? It wasn't just such a nice, happy little scene as the 60s are sometimes depicted.
Certainly the psychedelic drugs, mushrooms, LSD. It was a time of experimenting to find out what these really were. And it trapped a lot of people. I think they got caught up in it and couldn't escape it. The whole aspect of the sexual innuendos of the movie were very shocking to Warner Brothers. They just couldn't tolerate it. They stopped coming to rushes. They didn't want to see the film at all. They wanted to wait until there was an assembly. Then somebody from Los Angeles came over who wanted to see the film. He saw some of the sequence in the film where Mick Jagger was in the bath with two actresses, and he was outraged by it.
You'd love him.
Do you think I should wash my hair?
Mm-mm.
They said even the bath water's dirty. I said, well, if they've just got out of the bath, I guess it would be dirty for them.
Warner Brothers shut the film down for a week. They said that they were disgusted by it, and this was not a movie that you could put together. And finally, we implored them and begged, cajoled, threatened, whatever, and they allowed us to resume and to finish the film.
I didn't work after performance. Just seemed to stop work and go for... I went actually back into my youth. I went back into my childhood friends and all that. I sort of drifted away from that very immediate world in which I was living. It's strange.
Yeah, it did get involved, and I drove a lot of people, I think, a bit crazy at the time I was making the film. But then I came back to normal. Stopped wearing makeup all the time.
It was just a rite of passage film for me. It must have ended something for me. It didn't shock me. I don't think I was ruined by the film, as has often been said, that it blew my mind or anything like that. My mind, if it had been blown long before that.
Performance is now seen as one of the most significant films of the 60s. Its style and subject broke all the rules. But it was not acceptable to Warner Brothers, and when after endless re-editing it was finally released, the 70s had begun. London by this time had a dangerous and overheated swing to it, and for the American studios, British films were no longer big business.
What I did not have knowledge of was how badly the other companies were doing. Universal, I think, made something like 20 films, not one of which was a commercial success. And this is not to say that they were bad films. I mean, they were extremely well-made films, some with great artistic merit, films like Isadora, Beaufort's Gun, Charlie Bubbles, but they did not attract an audience.
I stopped making the films. I stopped doing it because you can only do it so many times, and then you got to say, stop.
A lot of the Brits decided that they had a taste of American money, that they wanted to work in the same kind of conditions. They didn't want to go back to making lower budget films. They wanted to have the same kinds of budgets they'd had working for American companies. So there was an exodus, not only of Americans, but I think it was the beginning of the exodus of the British as well to Hollywood. That, to this day is unstoppable.
I don't think that you can say the Americans screwed up the United Kingdom. I think the industry took from the United Kingdom what it wanted. Didn't, as it doesn't anywhere as far as I'm concerned, support an ongoing industry. I think it's a business.
The British film boom of the 60s began in black and white with Joe Lampton heading for the big time in Halifax. It ended with an East End gangster losing his mind in a color-saturated pad in Notting Hill. Along the way, London had become the city that everyone wanted to hang out in. It had the music, the fashion, the bright young things. And for a while, everything shot better here. In the 60s, there was a real attempt by a disparate group of young filmmakers to break away from the stiff upper lip school of British pictures. And as they struggled to come to terms with a rapidly changing society, they produced some groundbreaking movies and a batch of, well, unfortunately memorable failures. But what was really significant about that era was the feeling of confidence and vitality that it generated in the industry. Directors had films they wanted to make in Britain, and Hollywood came over here to make them. It's become fashionable now to knock the 60s, to undervalue the fundamental changes that took place in that decade, and to dismiss the British cinema of the period with a knowing look. But shouldn't we feel prouder of a decade of films which were moving, stylish, and experimental, and struck a chord with millions of cinema goers? And what are we doing now that could be said to rival what was going on then?
The Test Your Brain game is on the way here on BBC4. Phil Jupiter, Phil Bailey, and Dara O'Brien join Stephen Fry for QI next.